I still remember the way the morning light used to fall on our old wooden floor the same way it does now, but quieter. Back then, the house felt alive. You could hear the sound of small feet running down the hallway, the echo of laughter, the slam of doors. Every corner carried a voice, a presence, a reason to stay awake and alive. But these days, the house breathes differently. It exhales memories instead of moments. My name is Daniel. I'm 58 years old, a father of two, a husband, once a proud one, now just a man who sits too long at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that turns cold before he remembers to drink it. There was a time when mornings meant chaos, lunchboxes, missing shoes, cereal spilled on the counter. I used to complain about it all. I'd sigh, say things like, "Can't we have one morning that isn't a mess?" I didn't know that someday I'd give anything to hear that chaos again. Life has a cruel way of showing you what matters usually, when it's already gone. I wasn't always the man who stayed silent. I used to talk, laugh, sing even, back when the kids were small and my wife, Anna, would dance around the kitchen humming old songs from the radio. She had that way of making everything feel lighter. I worked long hours back then, construction mostly, later as a site manager, but she always made home feel like rest. I thought that was enough. That providing meant loving. That showing up tired was still showing up. But the truth is, I missed more moments than I can count. There was this one morning my son, Ethan, must have been 8 then. He was building something with old wood scraps behind the house. I was late for work, dressed in my best shirt. He looked up at me with those wide, curious eyes and said, "Dad, can you help me? I want to make a birdhouse." I told him, "Maybe later, champ. Dad's got a meeting today." He nodded, smiled, and said okay. When I came home, the birdhouse was done lopsided, uneven, but standing proudly on a stick. He said, "It's okay, Dad. I figured it out." I smiled back, but deep down, something ached. I didn't realize that would be one of the last times he'd ask for my help. That's how it happens, one, maybe later at a time. Years passed. The kids grew up. The noise faded. I kept working. I thought I was doing it for them, the long hours, the extra shifts, the savings account that looked good on paper. But money doesn't remember your voice. It doesn't laugh with you at dinner. It doesn't call you Dad. By the time I slowed down, they were already living their own lives. My daughter, Lily, moved to another city. Ethan went overseas. They both visit when they can, which means once or twice a year, sometimes less. We talk on the phone, but it's never the same. They sound polite, kind, but distant, like they're talking to someone who belongs to another time. I can't blame them. I was the same once. I didn't call my parents as often as I should have. I thought I had time. Everyone thinks they have time. Anna says I'm too quiet these days. She's right. I don't talk much because I don't know what to say anymore. I just watch the trees outside, the empty chairs, the photographs on the wall. It's strange how you can miss people who still exist. Last week, I found an old camcorder in the attic, the kind we used to record birthdays with. I charged it, pressed play, and there we were, 20 years younger. Lily with frosting on her nose, Ethan blowing out candles, Anna laughing, and me standing in the corner holding the camera saying, "Smile for Daddy." I never realized how many moments I watched through a lens instead of living in them. The video ended, and for a long time, I just sat there. I could hear the faint echo of my younger self in that shaky old recording, a man who didn't know what he was losing while he was busy trying to win. The next morning, I went for a walk. It's something I do every day now, around the lake near our house. There's a bench there, under a willow tree. That's where I think the most. About time, about mistakes, about how love doesn't always sound like, "I love you." Sometimes it sounds like, "Be careful," or "Did you eat?" or "I'll take care of it." But love needs to be said too. I know that now. That day, while I was sitting on that bench, I saw a young father playing catch with his little boy. The kid kept missing the ball, laughing every time it rolled away. The father laughed too, patient, kind, present. For a moment, I saw myself, not the man I was, but the one I should have been. I wanted to walk up to him, tell him, hold on to this. Every throw, every laugh, don't blink, but I just watched. Some lessons come too late to teach, only to feel. When I came home that evening, Anna was sitting on the porch, reading. The golden light touched her hair the same way it did years ago. I stood there, watching her, thinking how much we've been through love, loss, quiet seasons. I walked up to her and said, "Do you ever miss how things used to be?" She smiled softly and said, "I miss how simple it was to be happy." That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the ceiling fan, the ticking clock, everything reminded me of time passing. I thought about Ethan and Lily, about how I never told them how proud I am, how much I love them. Fathers don't say those things easily. We think our actions speak for us. But silence can be heavy. It fills rooms, hearts, years. So, I decided something. Tomorrow, I'll write them both letters, not emails, not messages, real letters. Maybe they won't read them right away. Maybe they'll read them years later. But at least my words will find them, even if my voice can't. I got up before sunrise, made a cup of coffee, sat at the same old table, the one with scratches from school projects and dinner nights. I looked out the window, the sky slowly turning gold. It felt peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what I lost. I was thinking about what I still had the chance to say, what should have been said long ago. And that's how it began, with a pen, a blank page, and a father trying to turn regret into love. The next morning, I sat at the table, the pen hovering over the blank page. I hadn't written a letter in decades, not like this, not with the intention of speaking from the heart instead of the mind. I could feel the weight of my own words, heavier than any work, contract, or paycheck I'd ever signed. There was no urgency in deadlines now, no boss looking over my shoulder, only the silence of my house, broken occasionally by the soft chirping of birds outside. I started with Ethan. "My son," I wrote, the words feeling strange on the paper. They felt vulnerable, honest, exposed. Vulnerability wasn't a word I often used. Fathers rarely spoke it aloud, but it was necessary. I told him I loved him, not just in the way fathers say when it's assumed, but in the way a man finally admits to himself and to his child that love isn't about provision or protection alone. It's about presence, about being seen, about holding a space where mistakes are allowed, where growth is honored. I remembered his first baseball game. He had been so small, swinging the bat too hard, missing the ball every time. I had cheered for him, yes, but mostly out of habit. I didn't realize then how much he noticed my half-hearted enthusiasm, how my eyes, even when smiling, betrayed impatience. I wrote that I was sorry for all the times I missed the real victories, the effort, the persistence, the courage it took for him to keep swinging. I told him that the trophy on his shelf wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the man he had become, the integrity he carried, even when the world didn't notice. The pen moved slowly across the page, every word measured. I didn't want to rush. I wanted each sentence to carry the weight of intention, the honesty I had so often hidden behind work and worry. I wrote about our mornings at the lake, how he used to run ahead of me, demanding I keep up, and how I often lagged behind, watching the sun glint off the water and thinking about deadlines and bills. I apologized for those moments, for my absence, for thinking that being busy was the same as being present. Then I wrote to Lily, my daughter, the one who always saw things differently, who challenged me, who questioned the rules I thought were unbreakable. I wrote about her first recital, how her little fingers trembled on the piano keys, and how I almost missed the first notes because I had left work early but not early enough. I remembered her glancing at me with that tiny frown, that mix of disappointment and hope. I told her I was proud of her courage, her creativity, and her heart, and that I wished I had said it more often. As I wrote, I realized how much I had carried my own pride, how often I had let ego dictate the way I showed love. I remembered arguing with Anna over small things, arguing with my own father over bigger ones, and how those conflicts had quietly taught me to close off, to protect myself, to measure love by effort instead of expression. I wanted my children to know that love doesn't need to be earned, that it doesn't depend on achievement or perfection. It is unconditional, messy, demanding, and forgiving all at once. By mid-morning, the letters were halfway done. The sun was climbing higher, casting long stripes across the table, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. I took a break, walked to the window, and looked at the city stretching out before me. It was busy, vibrant, indifferent, just as life had been when I was raising my children. People hustled, laughed, argued, lived. And I realized that I was writing to give my children something timeless, something that wouldn't fade with distance or circumstance, words that would linger, even if my presence could not. I thought about the lessons I had learned too late, about humility, about patience, about the quiet strength of kindness. I wrote these into the letters because I wanted my children to inherit wisdom, not just stories. I wanted them to understand that life wasn't about accumulating trophies, promotions, or money. Life was about connection, about being seen, about leaving a gentle mark on the world, one that doesn't require acknowledgement or applause. Then I paused. The pen still in my hand, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. What if they didn't understand? What if they read my words and saw only mistakes, only regrets? But I wrote anyway. That was all I could do, speak my truth, honest and unfiltered. Fathers rarely get the chance to apologize without conditions. I had that chance now, and I seized it with every ounce of courage I could muster. I remembered a specific evening, years ago, when Ethan had been sick. I was working late, exhausted, and I nearly didn't answer the phone. He had whispered into the receiver, "Daddy, I can't sleep." Something in that quiet voice, so small, so vulnerable, pierced me instantly. I left work early, rushed home, held him through the night, and promised him, silently, that I would always try to be there. I wrote that story, too, as a reminder that love is action, even when it's imperfect. And Lily, her first heartbreak. I remembered the day she came home crying, clutching a crumpled note from a boy she liked. I didn't know what to say. I just held her, and eventually, she laughed through tears, realizing that the pain was fleeting, that her heart was stronger than she thought. I wrote about that too, and how I wished I had been braver in giving advice and offering support without trying to fix everything. Hours passed. The kitchen grew quiet, except for the scratching of the pen and the occasional sip of coffee. I paused occasionally, letting memories drift in, letting regrets mix with gratitude. I realized that love had always been there in the moments I failed to notice, in the sacrifices I assumed went unseen, in the small gestures that mattered more than I could ever measure. By evening, the letters were complete. I read them aloud softly, as if my children were sitting across from me. Each word sounded strange and unfamiliar, because it wasn't the voice I had always used, it was my heart speaking directly. I folded the letters carefully, put them in envelopes, and addressed them. I couldn't deliver them tonight. I wanted the words to settle, to carry weight, not to be rushed. I sat back in my chair, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I had spoken truths I'd held for decades. Heavier because I knew these letters couldn't undo lost time. They couldn't replace the mornings I missed, the arguments I mishandled, the laughter I ignored. But they could bridge something, a start, a path toward connection, a promise that I would no longer be absent in spirit, even if life sometimes demanded my absence in presence. That night, I barely slept. I thought of their faces, Ethan with his stubborn determination, Lily with her gentle defiance. I imagined them opening the letters, reading every word, feeling the weight of my love and regret intertwined. I imagined conversations that might follow, moments where silence could be broken, where apologies might bloom into understanding. The next morning, I walked to the mailbox. The air was crisp, the kind that reminds you of beginnings. I placed the letters in the slots, felt their weight in my hands one last time before letting go. And in that act, I felt a strange liberation, a sense that I had finally done what I could, that love had been spoken, even across distance, even across time. Walking back home, I reflected on what it meant to be a father, not perfect, not always present, but always willing to face the truth, to own mistakes, to love fiercely, quietly, without expectation. I realized that honesty was a kind of power, not the kind you measure in money or status, but the kind that builds trust, that heals wounds, that gives freedom to both the giver and the receiver. By the time I reached the house, the sun was high, illuminating the dust motes once again. I sat on the porch, watching the world move. Children laughed somewhere nearby, couples walked hand in hand, dogs chased balls, parents called out reminders and warnings, and I felt a quiet joy, small, understated, but real. Because for the first time in years, I felt present, truly present, not because life demanded it, but because I chose it. And that choice, to be honest, to speak, to love, felt more valuable than anything I had built with my hands or earned with my sweat. It felt like redemption, not for my mistakes, but for my silence. It felt like hope, not for what was lost, but for what could still be built. The day after the letters were sent, I woke up earlier than usual, as if anticipation itself had stirred me before the alarm. The sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting stripes across the floor, and I felt that familiar mixture of hope and anxiety, the kind that accompanies any step toward reconciliation. I poured a cup of strong black coffee, inhaled the aroma deeply, and sat at the table by the window. I could almost imagine Ethan and Lily reading my letters, seeing the truth I had tried so long to hide, feeling the weight of my words in the quiet corners of their rooms. I didn't have to wait long. My phone buzzed mid-morning. It was Ethan. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant, carrying that careful balance between expectation and relief. "I read your letter." His pause stretched, like he was measuring whether it was safe to continue. I listened quietly. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." His words stumbled over themselves, unsure of their place, unsure if they were enough. "I know you didn't mean to be absent. I know you did your best. But I felt it anyway. I felt it missing. I let silence sit between us, because silence itself was part of communication, a space where reflection could grow. "Yes, son," I finally said, voice steady but soft. "I was absent in many ways. I thought I was giving what mattered, provision, stability, protection. But I see now that presence, acknowledgement, emotional availability, those were the things I failed to give as much as I should have." I could hear him exhale, a small but meaningful release. "I'm trying to be better now, not to erase the past, but to build what comes next." We talked for hours that morning, not about schedules or work, not about sports or grades, but about life, about mistakes, about the small moments that had shaped us all. I learned what he had been holding inside. The disappointments, the fears, the quiet yearning for recognition. I shared mine not as a lecture, not as justification, but as truth. I told him about my own father, about the lessons I thought I had learned but only understood now, about the weight of pride and the cost of silence. By mid-afternoon, we had moved on to Lily. She called, her voice trembling slightly, carrying that delicate mixture of defiance and vulnerability that always defined her. "Dad," she said, "I don't even know where to start. I read your letter and I cried. I felt things I didn't know I could feel." I nodded silently, though she couldn't see me, understanding exactly what she meant. Tears are a strange kind of bridge. They break down walls we didn't even know were there. "I'm sorry, Lily," I said, letting the words settle in the air between us. For all the moments I wasn't present, for all the times I prioritized work or pride over listening, over being here. I can't undo the past, but I want to be here now, in every way I can. There was a pause, and then a whisper. "I want that too, Dad. I want it more than anything." We spent the rest of the afternoon in that quiet, almost sacred exchange, recounting small memories, shared laughter, hidden fears, and unspoken hopes. I realized how long it had been since I had truly connected with my children, not as a provider, not as a disciplinarian, but as a man striving to be honest, striving to be present. And I felt a deep humility in that realization, because no promotion, no achievement, no accumulation of wealth could have given me what this moment offered. Later that evening, Marcus came to mind, my youngest, still learning, still absorbing the world like a sponge, still measuring love through observation rather than words. I decided it was time for him to see a different model of masculinity, one built not on control or dominance, but on honesty, empathy, and the courage to face one's own faults. I called him, and he answered with a soft, cautious hello. "Marcus," I began, "I want to talk about last night, not to scold, not to instruct, but to share some truths about how families love and respect work." He listened, patient and quiet, absorbing every word. I told him about boundaries, about the power of saying no without guilt, about the difference between respect earned and respect demanded. I told him that family is sacred, but it does not grant the right to manipulate or humiliate. He asked questions thoughtful, probing, sometimes hesitant, and I answered honestly, drawing from years of mistakes and hard-learned lessons. We spoke about his relationship with Simone, about how love should not require submission, about how true partnership thrives on trust, communication, and equality. I could sense his relief, the unburdening of doubts he hadn't even realized he carried. I told him that life is a constant negotiation between love, respect, and integrity, and that the measure of a man is not in what he commands or accumulates, but in how he treats others, especially those he loves. After our conversation, I sat alone for a while, reflecting on the lessons of the day. I realized that the process of reconnecting, of being seen, of being honest, of establishing boundaries was not just beneficial for them. It was transformative for me. I was shedding the invisible armor I had worn for decades, the one that equated authority with affection, control with care. I was learning, painfully and beautifully, that love requires humility, not pride. That strength requires softness, not aggression. That honesty, even when uncomfortable, carries its own quiet power. That night, I found myself walking the empty streets near my home. The city, quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I passed families, couples, children playing, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I thought of Veronica and Franklin, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. They had taught me a lesson in their own way, about what not to become, about the emptiness of wealth without integrity, about the limits of power when divorced from empathy. Their world, filled with possessions and status, seemed fragile from where I stood, lacking the deeper connection I now cherished with my own children. I remembered the lessons I had learned from my own father, flawed and human, and from the wisdom I had accumulated through life. I understood, finally, that the measure of a man is not in what he owns, but in what he leaves behind. Not just material inheritance, but the example, the love, the courage, and the truth he imparts. I realized that the legacy I wanted for my children was not about security alone, but about moral compass, resilience, compassion, and authenticity. A few days later, I received a message from Lily. "Dad, can we meet?" she asked. "I want to talk in person." My heart lifted. "Of course," I replied. That afternoon, I waited in a small, quiet cafe, watching the world go by until she arrived. Her hair was loose, her eyes bright yet wary, carrying the emotions she had yet to fully release. We sat across from each other, hands wrapped around warm mugs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the true weight of being a father. The responsibility, the tenderness, the vulnerability. We talked for hours. Not about work, not about achievements, not about discipline. We spoke about feelings, fears, regrets, hopes. I shared the moments I had failed, the times I had been absent, and the lessons I had learned too late. She shared her own journey, how she had internalized expectations, how she had wrestled with fear of failure, how she longed for connection without conditions. And in that exchange, we both understood something essential. That love, when stripped of pretense and ego, is transformative. It heals, it nurtures, it frees. I realized that setting boundaries with my own children was not about control. It was about respect. Respect for their individuality. Respect for the values I hoped to instill. Respect for the love we shared. I encouraged them to define their own standards, to assert themselves, to understand that life will always present challenges, but integrity and honesty are the tools to navigate them. We laughed, we cried, we reminisced. And when we finally left the cafe, there was a shared sense of liberation, a quiet, profound understanding that our relationships had shifted, deepened, and strengthened. As I walked home that evening, the sun setting, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, I felt the unmistakable peace that comes from alignment between intention and action, between love expressed and love felt, between a father's heart and his children's understanding. I knew there would be future challenges, missteps, disagreements. Life rarely allows perfection, but I also knew this. The foundation we had built that day, honesty, empathy, respect, would guide us through whatever came next. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly rich. Not in money, not in status, not in accolades, but in love, presence, and connection. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, painting gentle patterns across the floor. I sat at the kitchen table, cup of black coffee in hand, feeling the quiet pulse of the city outside. There was a new weightlessness in my chest, the kind that comes not from relief alone, but from clarity, honesty, and the profound understanding of what truly matters. The weeks of reflection, of difficult conversations with Ethan, Lily, and Marcus had left me changed, lighter, and more aware of both my responsibilities and my limits. I decided to take a walk, something I hadn't done in years with any real intention. Not to exercise, not to run errands, but simply to observe life, to let my mind wander and settle, to notice the small details often missed in daily routines. The streets were alive, with movement, street vendors opening their stalls, children running to school, couples walking hand in hand, the smell of fresh bread from bakeries, the soft hum of traffic. Every face, every gesture carried its own story. I felt connected, not in ownership or authority, but in quiet, shared humanity. As I walked through the nearby park, I noticed an elderly man feeding the birds, much like I had seen weeks before when the lessons of simplicity and generosity first struck me. There was something profound in his ordinary act, a reminder that richness lies not in possessions or titles, but in presence, in giving without expectation, in observing life without judgment. I sat on a nearby bench, watching the pigeons flutter and peck at the crumbs. Big birds, small birds, some graceful, some scruffy, all sharing, all coexisting, all living. It struck me anew. The world we create for ourselves often depends not on what we acquire, but on how we participate, how we nurture, and how we show up in each moment. My thoughts drifted to Veronica and Franklin, their opulent lives and hollow values. They had been a mirror, reflecting what I never wanted to become. People consumed by wealth, obsessed with status, blind to the emotional cost of their actions. And yet, observing them from afar, I no longer felt anger. I felt compassion tempered by detachment. They were trapped in their own illusions, and no lecture, no demonstration, no confrontation could unchain them. Their lesson had been for me, for my children, for the future I was building. I could let go of resentment, because resentment serves only the one who carries it, while truth liberates everyone it touches. Later that afternoon, Marcus called. "Dad," he said, his voice lighter than I had heard in weeks. "Simone and I, we finally feel like we're on the same page. We've set boundaries, and even though my parents didn't like it, it feels right. It feels like freedom." I smiled quietly, a warmth spreading across my chest. "That's because you're choosing the path of honesty, integrity, and respect. Boundaries are not walls to separate. They are bridges to healthier, stronger relationships. You've learned that the hard way, but now you carry it forward with wisdom." We talked long into the evening about love, respect, and navigating family dynamics without losing oneself. I shared stories of my youth, mistakes I had made, and the lessons I had gleaned from them. I emphasized courage, the courage to say no when it matters, the courage to be vulnerable, and the courage to forgive without compromising one's values. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his voice curious, reflective, and tender. I realized then that these conversations, these shared truths were far more meaningful than any material inheritance I could ever leave. As the days passed, Ethan and Lily began to reach out more openly. Visits, phone calls, shared meals, they came not out of obligation, but choice. And in those moments, I felt an unparalleled satisfaction. I saw my children maturing into individuals capable of discernment, capable of standing for what they believed, capable of forming relationships rooted in respect rather than fear or expectation. I recognized that my own journey, the mistakes, the absence, the eventual honesty had been necessary for their growth. It was the slow, painful construction of a foundation strong enough to support not just wealth, but character, integrity, and love. One evening, as the city lights flickered on and the sky darkened, I received a message from Simone. "Dad, thank you for everything." It read simply, "For listening, for teaching, for showing me a different way. I hope one day to live like you with dignity, compassion, and strength without cruelty." I felt a quiet pride, not of ego, but of recognition that truth, when lived consistently, resonates beyond immediate boundaries. It influences lives, shifts perspectives, and nurtures growth. I replied, "Thank you, Simone. And remember, the greatest lessons are learned not from words alone, but from choices, reflection, and persistence. Live honestly, and you will be rich in ways money cannot measure." That night, I sat on my balcony, overlooking the city. The streets shimmered under streetlights, distant voices, the hum of cars, the occasional laughter of passers-by. I felt a profound stillness within me, the kind that comes from alignment between values, actions, and relationships. My life had been a complex tapestry of choices, some wise, some flawed, but each contributing to the man I had become. I realized that wealth, status, and power are fleeting. They cannot substitute for presence, integrity, or love. But the bonds we nurture, the lessons we share, and the truth we live endure far beyond our years. I thought of the lessons I had passed on to my children, that boundaries are necessary, that love does not require submission, that respect is earned and given freely, and that integrity outweighs influence. I thought of Marcus navigating his own relationship with Simone, Ethan, and Lily, asserting themselves in ways they never had before, and I felt a quiet joy, not pride in a conventional sense, but the satisfaction of witnessing growth, understanding, and self-respect taking root. The next morning, I prepared my simple breakfast, black coffee steaming in my mug, and sat by the window. Life had resumed its ordinary rhythm, vendors calling out their wares, children laughing on the sidewalks, couples walking dogs. I realized something essential. Happiness and fulfillment are not found in exceptional circumstances or grand gestures. They are found in authenticity, in simple presence, in connecting deeply with those around you, in living according to principles rather than appearances. I took out my journal, an old leather-bound book I had kept for decades. I wrote not to impress, not to record achievements, but to reflect, to capture the clarity of my thoughts, and to remind myself of the journey I had traversed. I wrote about forgiveness, about boundaries, about honesty, about the fragile yet enduring strength of the human heart. I wrote about the difference between living to prove oneself and living to be true to oneself, and how that difference defined not just a life, but a legacy. By mid-morning, Ethan and Lily arrived at my apartment. We shared breakfast, laughter, and conversation, effortless in its ease and depth. I noticed Marcus standing in the background, observing, learning, absorbing the subtle dynamics of trust, honesty, and mutual respect. I realized that the true wealth I had cultivated was not in accounts, properties, or titles, but in the lives I had touched, in the hearts I had helped shape, in the values I had passed down. That knowledge, that clarity, was more valuable than any fortune. Later, as the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue over the city, I reflected on the journey of the past weeks. Difficult dinners, emotional confrontations, long conversations, and heartfelt letters, they had all led to this point. A father's love, when coupled with honesty, patience, and courage, had the power to transform not just his own heart, but those of his children. And in that transformation, I found a peace that was absolute, unwavering, and profound. I understood, finally, that life is a series of choices. Choices to act with integrity, to speak with honesty, to love with authenticity, and to set boundaries without fear. That the measure of a man is not in what he owns, but in what he nurtures, in how he lives, and in the legacy he leaves in the hearts of those he loves. And I realized that I had been given that gift, not perfection, not acclaim, but clarity, presence, and the ability to shape the lives of my children in ways that would endure long after I was gone. That evening I poured a final cup of tea, settled into my favorite chair, and watched the city lights flicker as night fell. My phone buzzed a simple message from Marcus. "Dad, I love you. Thank you for everything. For being here. For teaching. For showing me how to be better. I'm proud to be your son." I smiled. A slow, deep smile. I replied simply, "I love you too, son. Always. That will never change." And as the city hummed quietly beneath me, I felt the immense richness of life itself, not in gold, jewels, or status, but in love, integrity, honesty, and connection. That night, I went to bed not with the weight of expectation, not with the burden of regret, but with the simple, profound satisfaction of a father who had spoken his truth, reclaimed his presence, and nurtured a legacy far greater than any material fortune. I had finally come home to myself, to my children, to the life I had always hoped to live. I closed my eyes and understood something essential. Real wealth is measured not by what you possess, but by how authentically you live, how deeply you love, and how honestly you face the world. And in that truth, I was immeasurably rich. Did you enjoy this story? I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Let's connect in the comments below. If this story touched you, your support through a super thanks helps me continue sharing more heartfelt stories like this. I truly appreciate every single one of you. On the screen, You'll also find 2 more life stories I think you'll love. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe and join our community. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this journey. I'll see you in the next story with love, respect, and gratitude.